This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
There's so many beautiful outcomes and possibilities if we embed Aboriginal food sovereignty, and it's not taking anything away from non-Aboriginal people. It's, you know, how we can kind of move forward.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. Caley Callope works with Black Duck Foods, an Indigenous produce enterprise that encompasses farming, learning, connection and culture on Yuin Country in East Gippsland in Victoria. Caley brings her whole self to her role. There's her rich and proud Aboriginal heritage, the complexity in how she was raised in generosity and community, and an academic lens which also informs her intention and ambition.
So yeah, my name's Caley Callope and I work at Black Duck Foods. I'm a Butchulla Angathimari woman. I grew up on Yagara People's Country, which is Brisbane, and I've got family connections to Bindal Mob on my grandfather's side and Waka Waka Country. Cherbourg and Mapoon Mission were the missions that both my parents were born and raised on, and I come from two very staunch Aboriginal parents. And, you know, kind of talking a little bit about me, I guess I was a lot of my life, I was a girl that was told constantly to use my benangs, which is kind of somewhat translates to use my ears, which really kind of never just means the Western notion of listening. I was kind of never told exactly what to do, but to observe and make my own way. And I guess food has always been really a big part of my life, and whether that was in the absence and limited access to food in the first 12 years of my life, or, you know, contrasted when I went to a boarding school for high school where there was, you know, an overabundance and waste of food, to, you know, growing up with my father being really witty and able to use limited produce and produce incredible food, and learning, you know, generational old recipes that were taught to him by his grandmother and other old auntie girls, such as, you know, Johnny cakes and chicken vermicelli, which you'll hear lots of mob talk about those two things, to now having finished my honours thesis, where I looked at Aboriginal food sovereignty and the relational dimensions of health and well-being. And as I mentioned before, working at Black Duck Foods now as well. I guess just kind of framing the lens that I bring to these conversations is, you know, one where I've had lots of opportunities in my life, definitely more opportunities than my parents and those before me. And I'm kind of continually observing and learning how the layers of my own blackness, in lots of different contexts that plays out, how my blackness and privilege in spaces such as university, you know, spaces such as having a job, that it's not for my own self-worth or ego, but for the thriving of Aboriginal communities. I'm definitely no saint. And it's not a singular story. I know for many black fellas, ego and self-worth and caring for self and just the nuclear family isn't particularly considered the norm. And I'm already going on a bit of a tangent. But I guess really simply, to not complicate my response, who I am is, you know, how I was raised. And I think there's a lot of beauty when you see reciprocity, woven throughout poverty. I didn't grow up with much, but what my family had, we gave to others. So that's kind of a bit of a synopsis of who I am, and I guess that's reflected in the decisions that I make, such as what jobs and spaces I work for and how they contribute back to bigger things than just themselves.
Black Duck Foods launched in 2021, but it's built on countless generations of knowledge, tradition, and connection to country. The social enterprise nurtures both soil and soul and ensures Black voices are driving its activities and reap any rewards.
So Black Duck Foods is an Aboriginal social enterprise. It's started in 2021 and it really came from the work of Bruce Pascoe, which people might be familiar with, his book Dark Emu. That particular book put forth an argument for Australia to reconsider the narrative that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were, nomadic and hunter-gatherer society. And so Black Duck Food started in 2021 from that. It's situated inland from Malakuta, which is part of the Yuin Nation, and it's situated on a farm that's called Yambara Farms, which is the Yuin word for black duck. We've got 65 acres, and it's kind of nestled really beautifully beside the Wallago River. And on that farm, I guess, when people kind of visualise or think what a farm looks like, it definitely isn't. We don't have cattle, but what we do have is a diverse range of native plants and tubers, such as yam daisies, lilies, murnong. We've got some quandongs, and we're also growing a range of other things, kind of testing and trialling what's good for that particular soil and country. And of course, what we're kind of more well known for is the native grasses that we have on the farm. We also harvest from other neighbouring farms where we've built particular, genuine two-way working relationships. There's so much to say about Black Duck Foods because it's a really dynamic farm, but it's attempting to do a lot of things with minimal resources. Again, not a singular story. I've worked in and do some part-time work in another Aboriginal organisation. Aboriginal organisations and communities attempting to work with minimum resources is something that's really familiar to lots of people. Again, I guess that's why it's really important that we have relationships with other spaces. Maybe just a couple of tangible things about what we do, but the aspirations of Black Duck Foods is that we're wanting to influence the direction of the Australian agricultural space towards a more sustainable future. And the word sustainable is everywhere. But when we're thinking of that word, I guess, Aboriginal communities have been living sustainably for 80,000 plus years, and there's a lot of knowledge there. So what Black Duck Foods is attempting to do is to ensure that, that Aboriginal people are included in those conversations, are leading those conversations, are part of the decisions when we're talking about what to do with the land and resources. And I guess also, what we're attempting to do is we work within the native food space as well in regards to our native grains, but we're really attempting to introduce domesticated food products onto the market, keeping in mind, I guess, particular cultural protocols. We're not just growing anything on that land. We're growing things that are familiar to that land, familiar to that soil, familiar to the old people there that harvested, propagated, nurtured and processed those foods. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we're really working with the grains and tubers that held our soil together and promoted its fertility. And so lots of the work that we do links into those, aspirations that the globe is doing is around climate change and fertilizing our topsoil and using, traditional food growing and country management processes to look after the land, but also importantly to share the economic benefits of land, of country, of resources back to Aboriginal communities where those foods or resources belong to prior to colonisation.
Like many Aboriginal organisations, Black Duck Foods runs lean and small. Caley talks through the team and the relationships that sustain the social enterprise.
We're a really small team. So I'm based in Melbourne, and we've got a manager based in Sydney, and we've got two incredible knowledge holders, Terry Hayes and Chris Harrison, that have been working on the farm for a number of years. So if you drive down the dirt track, you'll see an Aboriginal flag wrapped around a tree as you're kind of entering once you've gotten off the main road. And what you'll come into is kind of like a bit of a valley, and you'll see garden beds, and you'll actually see Bruce Pascoe's house, and the Wallago River. And so the two farmers, our farm manager Chris and Terry, our farmhand, what they've been doing over the last number of years is really, I guess, testing and trialling how to harvest our grass, which happens quite naturally. That's not the hard part, but also then how to process and mill native grasses into flour. And we've got a whole range of other garden beds. So there's lots of, testing and trialling with other native plants. We also do run workshops at the farm, and that's kind of when I'll go to the farm to support. So we're really attempting to get mob to the farm to show them, what it is that we're doing at the farm, how we're, relearning these systems that Bruce says quite often hasn't been lost, like they're still there. So what we're doing is this relearning and resharing knowledge. So yeah, there's a whole range of different projects that we do, but on a day-to-day basis, the fellas on the farm, they're out there, they're learning country, they're looking after country, depending on the weather and depending on what needs to happen, we'll do cool burns as well. And what we've noticed when we're doing those cool burns, which are traditional, farming practices prior to colonisation, is that we're noticing, like wildlife coming back into those areas. We're also noticing invasive species being burnt off and then not coming back, and the native grasses coming and growing significantly for a better harvest the following year. So there is a lot of observing. There is a lot of learning, and there's a lot of capturing of what works and what doesn't work, and really a lot of relationships. So we've got a number of relationships with neighbouring farms that are really, you think of the question, how do we share this land given the complexities that exist around sovereignty of the land. But we've had non-Aboriginal farmers approach us and say, we want to work differently with this land, and we want to work differently with First Nations people. And part of that is a truth-telling process. It's being really honest and open around what happened on the land that they're situated within. And then we're also having a conversation, okay, how can we work together and share that land? So there's, really beautiful examples of working differently and moving forward given our complicated history.
Colonisation has been an ongoing process of dispossession, violence, disrespect and silencing. The Black Duck Foods project includes reclamation, relearning, gathering, bearing witness, and grieving. As Caley explains, it's about finding power, voice, belonging, and healing.
When you witness Yuin mob sitting on Yuin Country, showing you practices, burning country, showing you the native foods that their ancestors ate. Not only is the country itself where the Yambara farm is situated on incredibly beautiful, I guess witnessing that level of connection and that level of reclamation that, hey, this country is Black country. These are Black foods and we want to share them with everyone, not just Aboriginal people coming to the farm. Non-Aboriginal people can come and experience that as well. We do farm stays, but there's something really powerful when you get to witness mob from that country sharing cultural knowledge. And the first time that I went to Yambara Farm without even having that particular experience, and I'm not sure if it was COVID related, but I went out to the farm post some of the Melbourne lockdowns that had been happening. And as soon as I was driving out to the farm, because it is so incredibly beautiful, I got tears in my eyes. And then every time I go out and I witness or I learn something new, there's this aspect of, that's not my country, but there's this aspect of belonging and that you're invited to be part of that belonging. And it's really difficult to articulate. But I guess also, when we do have mob come out to the farm, and we've got a couple of big workshops coming up over the next month where we're having quite a few people come out and stay for 2 days and 2 nights, some of the feedback that we've had from previous people come out is this like overwhelming sense of gratitude and healing. So there's kind of this emotional healing aspects that happen, but it kind of just, obviously it makes sense. Lots of people can relate to when you go out in nature or when you go for a walk or, when you kind of just sit and be, when lots of people go camping, there is this rejuvenation that happens. But I think the extra layer for me is just being around mob. So, building connections, rebuilding connections that potentially, got fragmented due to dispossession and due to forced policies that, ripped families and communities apart. There's this kind of rebuilding and reclaiming and relearning things that people feel grief. Mob feel grief if they don't feel connected. They feel grief from what's happened. So there's this kind of moulding experience that supports people's healing process. It's really special. And again, I'll say it a third time, but a little bit hard to articulate.
A greater interest in and commercialisation of native foods doesn't necessarily lead to benefits for traditional owners. Caley talks about the continuing colonisation of Aboriginal foodways and the ways Black Duck Foods works to reclaim food and its context and stories.
I think, the native food industry is, native foods have been part of the colonisation process. I guess just being really upfront about that, that if we think of the three things that have kind of been part of this process, it's, the denial of Aboriginal people's sovereignty. It's been that food has been colonised. Aboriginal people's foodways have been colonised. We've had forced dietary transitions following colonisation and contemporary experiences of racism in the Western industrialised food system. in the past, I guess there was this aversion to cultivate local foods, this really undervaluing it. The Aboriginal people were savages, that their food was also not valued. But what we're seeing now, which is also one of the reasons why Bruce established Black Duck Foods, but what we're seeing now is that non-Indigenous spaces are seeing this value in native foods, and it's a monetary value. It's a very different value to how mobs see food, which is food has a story. And so within the native foods industry, obviously it's wrapped up in lots of other processes and systems and really minimal regulations. But what is happening at the moment, which is really quite scary, I guess, is that the native foods industry at the moment is roughly a $20 million industry. Less than 2%, I think it's like 1.3% of the profits goes back to Aboriginal places. And, this industry is moving quickly. There's been a forecast that it will reach 40 million by 2025. I guess why scary is probably not the best word to use, but it is a bit scary because the wealth of Australia and where wealth is situated from stolen land and resources. And if we think of things such as, in Victoria, we've got the truth-telling process, we've got a treaty process happening. We also, where was I going with that? Might have lost that thought, sorry. But yeah, in Victoria, so food can be part of a truth-telling process. But I guess, one of the reasons why that is quite scary is that if we leave Aboriginal communities and people out of this industry, similar to what we've done in a whole bunch of other spaces, it's again just part of the colonisation process. Unfortunately, if we think of things such as closing the gap, Aboriginal food sovereignty and the native food industry can be part of that process and can be part of that solution. We ideally, what we're wanting to see is Aboriginal people in those spaces where they're growing food, they're processing food, they're part of that production line, and they're getting the revenue and the economic benefit from food that their ancestors have a strong connection to and story to. Maybe just the other point on the native food industry is that, not all Aboriginal communities might want to produce food and package food and sell food. Some communities want food security and need food security, and obviously there's differences between rural, remote, and urban settings. So it's just kind of keeping in mind what does Aboriginal food sovereignty look like in those communities, and what are those aspirations of those communities. But in regards to the native food industry, it's leaving mob out, and it's doing it at a rapid pace. So we're really trying to advocate and educate some key messages of, if you're working with native foods or you're purchasing native foods, what are the ethical considerations? What are the moral complications that you should be thinking about? We know there's a lot of non-Aboriginal businesses even using, particular terms that reflect that it could potentially be an Aboriginal business or a Black-owned business, and profiting off that with potentially not returning any economic benefit back to local Aboriginal communities where that profits where they should see some of those profits.
One of the key Black Duck projects is growing and harvesting native grains. Caley explains the complexities of growing crops with origins in different Aboriginal nations and the potential availability to the broader community.
So Black Duck Food is selling flour, native flour. So we do, at the moment, as I mentioned, so we've got a couple of relationships with some farms where we harvest flour, grass from as well, and we have grass on Yambara farm. So what we're doing at the moment, and it really is dependent on our harvest season. So we, the fellas, not me, did a harvest this year, so in February and March. And at the moment, what we've got stock on, and we've got quite a bit of stock, is we do a blend of kangaroo and speargrass, and we do a blend of Mitchell and button grass. Again, you know, we just kind of being really clear, the grasses that we do grow, they don't belong to Yuin mob. So part of that process of us growing those native grasses is having those conversations back to the groups such as, you know, Mitchell grass, it belongs to the Kamilaroi people. So making sure that we've got permission to grow and harvest that grass. And obviously part of that process is, you know, what are those returns back to Kamilaroi mob? What are we doing to ensure that we're sharing that knowledge and we're sharing those profits? So, yeah, people can buy the flour on our website. And as I said, it's kind of dependent on harvest each season, but we had a really good harvest year and we kind of foresee many more good harvest seasons, in particular with the growth of Black Duck Foods, because we're kind of envisioning a bit of growth happening in this space as well. And that growth includes those relationships with farm land holders.
So you've got the grain. What about turning it into bread? Caley talks through the challenges and joys of baking with native grains.
So we've been making with the flour, there's a bunch of different restaurants and cafes testing different recipes. And we've got a partnership with the National Indigenous Culinary Institute, and they're also doing a bunch of testing. But on the farm, the fellas have been making, Chris in particular, he's an incredible cook. But on the farm, we've been making a whole range of kind of different breads. He's also been making kind of lasagna sheets and cheesecakes and a whole range of things. But one of the breads that we cooked, so with the Mitchell and button grass blend, that has low quantities of gluten. And then with the kangaroo and speargrass, it has higher gluten. And I guess that's important because it kind of, depending on what you cook, gluten is kind of helpful in different recipes. But with the kangaroo and speargrass, when we cooked a bread with that, so we do mix with organic white flour. We've got a recipe that we haven't completely that we're not completely happy with, where it's all native ingredients, where we're cooking a loaf of bread, including a rising agent that we're trying to figure out exactly what source we could get that from. But the bread itself is kind of dense and fluffy. I don't know if you can kind of have the two in the one, but quite dense. So the kangaroo and speargrass is dense. The flavour is really nutty. If you taste the flour itself, it tastes earthy. But with the bread, as I said, it is quite dense. It's fluffy, but it doesn't leave this overly bloating feel, similar to other breads. It does feel like you're eating something healthier, and I could just be being really biased right now. But it does taste like you're eating something special. And that's the feedback we've been getting. So I guess there's some high-end restaurants that have been using the flour, such as Attica, for quite a while now, and then really trying to target, particular cafes or restaurants where community might access, because unfortunately, it's because there is low supply and there's not a lot of resources within this particular context. It's not as accessible as we would hope it to be. In particular, we're wanting, mob to experience what this flour tastes like. But yeah, it is on our website, and it does taste incredible, and tastes like you're eating something that's really good for your gut. I'm definitely into gut health, and it doesn't leave you feeling regretful.
Black Duck Foods is about growing and supplying food, but it's also about access and pathways. Caley shares some of the organisation's aspirations.
A big aspiration for Black Duck Foods is for it to grow, but for a planned growth, and for it to provide a level of economic support to, the staff that work there, and to provide an opportunity for other Aboriginal communities, if they're interested, to enter these industries where there's not a lot of mob, but there's more mob entering. So the reason that the reason that I love it and the reason why I feel quite passionate about it is because I genuinely believe that if we embed aspects of Aboriginal food sovereignty, which Black Duck Foods is an example of that, if we embed aspects of Aboriginal food sovereignty into the Australian economy, we will have Aboriginal people having more jobs. We will have a truth-telling process between non-Aboriginal Australia and Aboriginal Australia, which will build better relationships. You think of, an example of, young kids in primary schools where they have bush tucker gardens and they have a local Aboriginal person coming to share the stories of those foods to those young fellas. You have young kids having conversations between each other and respecting the food, respecting the culture, and respecting the land. So I work at Black Duck Foods, and I love the work that I'm doing because there's this kind of aspiration of providing a better future for not just Aboriginal people, but, for how we treat the land and how we care for the land and how we care for the truth-telling process. Foods give, they give space for you and I to have a conversation around, deep time and how people can benefit of having those conversations and sharing those resources. I'm going to stop because I'm going on a real tangent, but there's so many beautiful outcomes and possibilities if we embed Aboriginal food sovereignty, and it's not taking anything away from non-Aboriginal people. It's, how we can kind of move forward.
Black Duck Foods is a small collective with huge horizons. It's about Aboriginal food sovereignty, relearning, looking after country, decolonising and truth-telling in a way that also provides opportunities for coming together. It's a moving and inspiring example of the power of food to create change, and a very special loaf of bread. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.